Well, hello, everyone. I'm very excited that you're able to join us today. My name is Matt Fulton. I'm the Vice President of National Engagement with Polco. Today, we've just got an excellent panel to share their perspectives on how it is to maintain a sense of community in a socially distanced world. We're going to be talking about some of the challenges that community leaders are facing from an engagement standpoint, to just how to effectively engage with the residents and other stakeholders in the community during this period of COVID and other issues that are going on in our overall world. Our goal today is that you take away a new idea, a fresh perspective, or maybe a new strategy, something that you'll be able to apply to be more successful in bringing your community together, simply to move forward. Here is the format of today's discussion, just to kind of give you an idea of what to expect. We'll take a few minutes to hear from each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their backgrounds. And then I'll kick off the conversation, asking questions to draw out some of the high-level themes and ideas that we should be thinking about. And then during the second half of the time, we'll open up the floor to give you an opportunity to ask specific questions of each other, or that you've been thinking about, or take a few questions from the audience. Does that sound good? If so, we'll get going with the panel introductions. Our first panelist is Hsiung, who's the Deputy Police Chief in Mountain View, California. Chris has played a critical role in leading the department's strategic communication efforts. He's got over 30 years in law enforcement and is a recognized leader in his profession. It was really cool to read about his honors that he's received from organizations like GovTech, Government Social Media, and he was recognized as one of the top 10 government influencers by ELGL, which is a national organization. I'm particularly impressed by how much Chris gives back to his communities and his profession. So Chris, let's just start with you, and would you mind just sharing a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, and good morning, everybody, and great to meet you virtually. As was mentioned, I've spent a lot of my time in the last few years, especially just really diving into the space of where digital engagement meets the community. Obviously, a lot of that from the law enforcement perspective, but also sharing that with a lot of public sector entities and understanding the biggest difference on the digital side, which is government tends to push information, but not always be so great at going two-way communication. To give you a little backdrop on maybe some of the answers that I'll be given today is earlier at the onset of the coronavirus crisis, our city manager actually grabbed me and said, I want you to take charge of a strategic communications team for the city. So a cross-department approach, basically employing all the same strategies the police department used, but on a citywide basis to really keep our community informed. And I'm sure we'll dive into those topics in a little bit.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it. Our second panelist is Brian Moran. Brian's the assistant to the city manager in Baytown, Texas. While Brian's relatively new in Baytown, he's got great experience working in Cleveland, Tennessee, where he was the city's chief spokesperson. And he managed the city's communication and public relations strategies. As a former ICMA board member, I was really happy to learn that he's an active member in ICMA, which is our professional association for city managers. So, Brian, if you wouldn't mind, share a little bit more about yourself and things that you're passionate about.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Brian Moran. I'm definitely happy to be here with this excellent panel. I've now been with the city of Baytown for about 8 months. I actually moved to the city in March, right before the pandemic. So I really hit the ground running here in Baytown. And one thing that we did differently here, being in Harris County, I think the third largest county in the nation, there's a lot of information being pushed out. And so what we did as a community is to really follow the lead of Harris County and push information that they were presenting, since they're the local health authority, to not confuse our citizens as to where to go. But I'm happy to be here and look forward to the conversation.
That's great, Chris. I'm really looking to hear your comments. And our third panelist is Christopher Pike. Christopher is the Economic Development Director in South Fulton, Georgia. I'm particularly interested in hearing from Christopher because he also serves as the executive director of the South Fulton Convention and Visitors Bureau, and is also the director of the South Fulton Downtown Development Authority. You know, given all of the impacts that COVID has had on business communities across the country, there's no doubt that Christopher's had his hands very full in addressing the engagement needs of the community, especially because South Fulton is one of the fastest growing areas in the Atlanta metropolitan area. So Christopher, thank you for being here, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about you.
Well, I certainly appreciate the opportunity to share in this discussion with you all about things that are going on at the local government level. As you had mentioned earlier, we've been really working hard here in the city of South Fulton, one of the fastest growing cities in the region. And that does pose some challenges for us. Not only are we the fastest growing city, but we're also the newest city in Georgia. In May, we just celebrated our 3rd year of existence. And so not only have we been putting the city together, but managing rapid growth, but also dealing with this last year of our concerns around COVID and how that's impacted our municipality. So just really excited to share our story and the things that we've been doing to really engage the community and to really keep a focus on our citizens and moving our community forward during this time.
That's great. Thanks, Christopher, and thanks to all of you for giving us a little bit more in-depth knowledge about who you are. Well, let me just do a little bit of a backdrop to our conversation. You know, as all of you know, in the environment we're living in today, it's just more important than ever to maintain meaningful connection with community stakeholders. I mean, COVID has just shaken up every community and disrupted everybody's aspect of what would be considered to be a stable way of life. And so it's just so critically important to make sure that we understand what the current needs and priorities are for our residents so that they feel they're being heard and feeling part of the community. Everybody wants to make sure that they feel as though they are part of a community, and that's where the sense of community becomes such an important thing. But the pandemic, of course, presents a lot of challenges. So how can we safely and effectively engage the community? So the topic that we're going to be discussing today with the group is maintaining a sense of community in a socially distanced world. One way to start the conversation is kind of taking a look at the problem. Polco's research arm is the National Research Center, and they actually have demonstrated and collected data that actually indicates that 80% of the US population has never even been to a city council meeting. So even before COVID and social distancing guidelines and everything that we're in right now, many communities have been struggling with the whole engagement aspect as well. And so you add a pandemic onto the equation, and now there are even more factors and challenges to overcome. People are literally having to adapt to a new world. We're working remotely and trying to homeschool our kids. There's so much going on for the average citizen right now for them to worry about what the government is doing. But we also know that the pandemic has shifted the needs and expectations on all of our residents in every aspect. It could be emotionally, financially, everything that is critical for folks to feel like they're getting a satisfying quality of life. So without question, engagement and connection with your residents has probably never, ever been more important. So how do we become better listeners and engage the community in a more meaningful way? So here are the 3 questions that we're going to be posing today and exploring with our panelists. And I'm really very interested in getting all of your perspectives on these topics. And let's just start with the first question. Chris, I'm curious, how has your communications and engagement strategy evolved since the beginning of the pandemic?
Well, if we take a look back at, dial it back all the way to the very beginning, for us, it was March. I believe we might have been one of the first counties to go into lockdown. And if you recall the pace and the flow of information coming from local, state, county, and federal at that time, it was completely overwhelming and at many times contradictory, very confusing. So how do we, in a sense, cut through that noise? Our approach was to kind of move forward with the understanding that many in our community were mobile smartphone users. So we developed a mobile first kind of approach. So in addition to email blasts and all the different existing forms of communication, we took a mobile approach, which meant changing our platform to something that looked a lot more visually appealing for our average resident who's pulling up our content. We also tried to really stoke a lot of two-way engagement in the creation of a hashtag campaign. For us, it was called hashtag TogetherMB, which is really to try to bind a lot of that sense of community that we can do this together. So across all the city departments, regardless of what their message was, we would try to embed the hashtag and the campaign in the backdrop to really kind of get that sense of community. And we would reach out to the community for even kind of stories, and not all of the news had to be coronavirus because people were just fatigued with all of that. So we created contests and campaigns about, you know, sidewalk art, having neighborhoods submit to us their sidewalk art, and the winner would be chosen and we would display it on the city marquee. So a lot of these different types of approaches just to keep people talking and keep people interested, because at the time it was just kind of a tidal wave tsunami of information.
Yeah, I love to hear about how you've engaged the residents in kind of a fun but meaningful way. That's great. Thanks, Brian. What about you? How has your communication and engagement strategy changed or evolved this year?
So starting at the beginning of the pandemic back in mid-March, really what our strategy was going back was, as Chris alluded to, cutting through the noise, figuring out how can we best present to the community the information. So we followed, you know, our Texas state guidelines. We followed Harris County guidelines, and we, you know, redirected, you know, people to that so as there wouldn't have as much confusion when they were trying to find the resources and the information pertaining to COVID. We heavily utilized our Swift Reach to inform the public of particular places to be tested, as well as some of our mobile testing sites that were here in Baytown. And then a lot also transitioned from, you know, we canceled, as pretty much all communities canceled, you know, our events. We ended up having to close down City Hall for an extended period of time. But really a shout out to our staff for making virtual events and other, you know, creative programming methods, such as I think our library, they did where you can come and drive by, whether it was books, they created digital library cards, they did podcasts. So as different ways to still engage with our community, but doing it in a way in this post-COVID world.
That's great, Brian. It sounds like Baytown was really very strategic in terms of how to provide residents access to information and kind of using all your departments and your facilities for helping to make that work. That makes all the sense in the world. That's great. And Chris, getting over to you, you know, engagement is such an important, it's such a fast growing area. How does engagement play into your success in maintaining a sense of community?
Well, for us, because our citizens are so involved and so tuned in to what's going on, we really saw that COVID and being quarantined really impacted our citizens the most, just because we have, you know, parks and rec facilities, those types of things. But our staff and our other departments were really proactive. Just to give you a couple of examples, we do a big annual anniversary celebration in May every year. Obviously, we weren't able to do the celebration that we normally do, but our communications team came together and we actually did a virtual celebration. So we had several DJs, and they were able we streamed them on all our social media and on YouTube. So the DJs performed. In between songs, we had citizens that had pre-recorded videos that we would play that spoke about people's connection to the community. So it was just a way for us to transform something that we'd normally had done an in-person thing that really was a benefit to the community, and did it virtually, but still had citizen participation. And so that was very well received. Another thing that we've done, our community and regulatory affairs departments that does all of our permitting and planning. We had already been working on this, but it was not slated to roll out as fast as it did, but doing virtually 100% online permitting. And so when COVID hit, we flipped the switch, went totally online so that developers and builders could submit all of their plans online virtually. They could pay their fees. When they submitted the plans, our engineers could mark up the plans on, virtually, send those comments back to the developers or to the builders. And that's how we really kept revenue coming in for the city, because we didn't close down those parts of our operation. And I will say, we closed our city hall down around March 13th. Our city hall is still closed. We have not opened back up yet, and it doesn't look like we're going to open up until January. So we've still been maintaining the level and quality of services to the citizens, but we've done it virtually. And then we've also just really been engaged with making sure that we provide information about COVID. For the first 3 or 4 months, we were sending out a daily newsletter with updates about the numbers in the area. I don't know if most people know, but city of South Fulton was the first hotspot really in Georgia. That's where the first school cases came out of in the state, where they closed down Fulton County school systems. So early on, we were impacted with the impacts of COVID. And so just being able to disseminate information, keeping our citizens engaged was something that we were very proactive in.
Christopher, did your engagement strategies evolve much in connecting with your business community?
Absolutely. So one of the things from a business standpoint that we realized early on, especially when we had a total lockdown of the city, was that they were really, really struggling. And of course, we knew it was bad, but we didn't really understand how bad it was. And so one of the things that we did from an economic development standpoint is that we sent out a survey to all of our businesses in our city. And it was a questionnaire that had, things that were related to COVID and the impact of their business. And they submitted those responses, and we used that information to develop strategies to help our businesses during that time. And so one of the things that we rolled out was South Fulton United Fund. And what the South Fulton United Fund allowed us to do was we raised money from businesses, but also from the citizens. We did a big campaign where we pushed out the South Fulton United Fund to the citizens, and everybody contributed. And what we did was, our frontline workers that were still going to work every day, we provided them lunch every day. But the caveat was we only bought lunches from local mom and pop restaurants in the city. And so we were spending about $2,000 to $2,500 a day, but we were infusing cash into restaurants that had been closed or had been just doing takeout. And we had restaurants calling us, telling us that they were able to make payroll that week because of the order that we had placed. And so that was just a way that we engaged the community and what I call our corporate citizens to help our restaurants segments, but to also provide some moral support for our frontline employees that were still out there working every day.
That is such a cool thing. What a creative way. I mean, I would just think that your business community would just greatly appreciate it from all sorts of respects, just being able to feel connected, as well as kind of pushing that money back into the local economy. That's really spectacular. Thanks. Well, let's move on to our second question. And Brian, we'll start with you this time. How do you think engagement influences how successful Baytown is able to maintain its overall sense of community?
So engagement is an important component of maintaining what we say instilling community pride, what we value as a city, what our citizens value. There's been one thing that we've implemented here is bringing on a community engagement coordinator with their role, in order to further connect us in a different way, with our citizens by working specifically closely with our civic associations, civic groups, nonprofits, as well as our neighborhood associations. And from that stemmed a new neighborhood empowerment grant to work with citizens as well as neighborhood associations to put together programs such as public art. And I think one of the programs stemmed from that is a storm drain campaign to put together different pieces of art to paint on the storm drains, to instill collaboration, and to show the community, what are you interested in, is one thing that we have done here. In addition, we've implemented, we did an FAQ video with the mayor, Harris County Public Health Authority, as well as the hospital, determined, in particularly with COVID, to showcase things that are happening in the community, in addition to what we're doing as a city.
Yeah, that's interesting. Would you say that Baytown has got a high priority on resident engagement in terms of just community activities?
Yes, we do. Even prior to my arrival, I've taken over our strategic planning process, which is community based. We have 5 strategic directives, and with that, we actually measure, which is available to the public to view, to determine, and you can see where our progress is, where we are. We're entering into year 4 of that plan as we speak. And so we didn't do one for this year because of COVID, but we also do an annual citizen survey to really evaluate and assess where we are and where we're moving forward, to strive to make sure that we're meeting those 5 strategic directives that derived from the community-based strategic plan.
That's great. That's very cool. Yeah, congrats on having that strategic plan approach. Christopher, let's switch over to you. It's such a unique area as you start thinking about this whole engagement topic and how it influences your residents' sense of community. I mean, your first response to the first question gave me a good sense for how you're handling it, but can you add on to that about what is it about resident engagement and how does it influence the community's success in maintaining that overall sense of community?
Absolutely. Well, I think one thing that should be noted, and I mentioned it earlier, is that our city is relatively new, just 3 years old. And so the fact that the city exists at all is because of community engagement. And so it was put on a referendum, a ballot referendum for citizens to vote for the creation of the city. But the reason why our citizens wanted to have a city was because of self-determination. And so that engagement follows through in everything that we do from a planning and management standpoint. Just to give you some examples, because we are a new city, everything is being created from scratch. So we just approved an economic development strategic plan that was heavily geared towards community engagement and making sure that the plan that we have reflects what our citizens want to see 5, 10, 15 years from now. And so it's interesting because that plan actually started out pre-COVID and it finished post-COVID or during COVID. So the community focus groups, some were in person initially, but then they switched to virtual. So still had that same engagement, still had that same level of interest. And it just shows that as a community, and especially as the people who work on behalf of the citizens, that we're very mindful that everything that we do has to be focused on the engagement of the community. Some of the other things that we're doing zoning rewrite plan right now. Again, that is community focused, led by input from the citizens. That's a plan that we've been working on for a year now, because as we know, zoning pretty much determines everything that happens from a development standpoint in your community. So I've really been engaged with that. And, just again, we've been very strategic about understanding and very thoughtful about understanding how do we create avenues for citizens to still be engaged, even though we're in the middle of a pandemic. And so all of our council meetings are virtual. but they're streamed on multiple platforms. Citizens can provide real-time feedback on those platforms, and then staff can, answer those questions in real time. We also do all of our um, meetings now. So like for the Downtown Development Authority meetings and Development Authority meetings, those are all done virtually. So it still allows for engagement with citizens. And so, we have been very proactive in making sure that we provide access. We have OpenGov as a resource for all of our financial stuff. So anytime we spend a penny, the citizens can log on and see where that money is being spent. And so it's just really making sure that we're transparent and engaged, and making sure that our citizens know that what they're, and I call it investing. When you pay your property taxes or your sales tax, you're really making an investment in a community. And we want to make sure that our citizens are getting a return on that investment.
Uh, that is very interesting. You're in such a unique and cool spot to be in a brand new community, and to hear about it being a values-based strategic planning, particularly as you're going through this whole COVID process.
Right.
Yeah, it sounds like you have done just an excellent job. The community has done an excellent job in engaging with its residents on all of those meaningful things that help them feel like they're part of the community. So congratulations on that. That's very.
It's interesting too, because Parks and Rec is in the middle of doing a parks master plan. Every department is in the middle of doing a master plan right now. So,
What happens when you're new?
so everything that you can think of planning for a community, we're in the middle of doing it in the middle of a pandemic, while still providing, a high level of service to our citizens.
Yeah, and my guess is that people are feeling their investments are very well spent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chris, let's shift over to you. Engagement is such an important part of law enforcement. I'm very interested in learning about your perspective on how your resident engagement work has influenced the sense of community in Mountain View.
Well, for us, the backdrop of kind of understanding how successful we are in getting into our community is not so much measuring how often or how frequently we talk to them, but how often they talk to each other about what we're trying to do. And that's a big kind of difference there. And so we kind of try to get a sense of sentiment and the buzz. And the position we take is we understand that in the midst of a crisis or something going on, people look to the government, especially local government, for leadership. And in a coronavirus situation, we're talking about not only being the lead in providing information, that goes without saying, but also being the connector of different community stakeholders, leaders, and groups. What that looks like in Mountain View is we have a social services agency known as the Community Services Agency, which is literally on the front lines of providing food, shelter, and assistance to those at need because of the crisis. The city also created a gigantic renter assistance and business assistance fund. So there's a lot of those types of things, and we work very closely with the chamber. And what that looks like behind the scenes is a lot of connecting and making sure all of our talking points and communication efforts are all consistent. Everyone knows, in a sense, playing from the same sheet of music. And from the outside, our hope is that as any resident looking at any of these communication channels, that there's no confusion. And that when they're talking to each other on platforms like Nextdoor, and there's a lot of buzz about the information the city or the chamber or this community service agency is putting out, it's consistent, it's useful, it's rich content that they can actually use to help them through this pandemic.
Chris, are you doing anything specifically in law enforcement area that is helping to keep people understanding or really appreciating the sense of community through your engagement work in the community?
Yeah, we have a very aggressive and progressive kind of social media person who just goes out there and just really, in a sense, takes what we hear from the city, from the state, in terms of if we're talking about the topic of coronavirus or not, but translates it in a sense using a lot of digital media. And what does that mean? That means using infographics, using videos, so that all of this information that can be very confusing is actually easily digested quickly in a mobile first platform, because we've found that even though the city has a comms team and a structure, a lot of times people just kind of innately navigate and find their way to the police department to ask a variety of different questions because we're there 24/7. So we're equipped to kind of also come back with those questions. But really, if you kind of peel the onion back and you look at some of the content that we put up, like if you were to go over to our page right now, you'd see a lot of videos that regardless of the video, regardless of the content or the information being shared, the underlying tone and the theme is we're together in this Mountain View, right? We're not saying that, but the script, the music, the look and feel and the tone of anytime we respond has very much that community feel embedded behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's great. During my career as a city manager, I was always impressed by the connectedness that the police departments had throughout the community with all of your neighborhood engagement. And it just sounds like you're taking this kind of unique environment and implementing technology, but still keeping those connections going. So that's great to hear. Well, let's shift over now to the third question. Which tools do you currently use to measure feedback from a resident's perspective during these challenging times? And for this one, why don't we start with you, Christopher? So what would you say you're doing for tool-wise?
Well, obviously everything is online now. And of course, if you bought some tech stocks back in February or March, you'd probably be pretty well off right now. So we use pretty much every platform. So all social medias. Not only does the city have a social media platform from a communications department standpoint, but economic development has their own platforms as well. The police has a platform, Parks and Rec, and also fire. And so you're able to disseminate different communication points, but the same message over multiple platforms. And so folks can stay engaged during all of those different types of information venues. Obviously, Zoom has been really a great tool for us because that's a lot of the community engagement stuff. So for example, when we were rolling out our tax allocation district redevelopment plan, which most communities call TIFT, we call them TADs here in Georgia. Obviously, there has to be a community engagement, public hearing part of that. And so we were able to still meet the state mandates to be able to accomplish and approve that plan, but use technology to be able to do that since you can't have in-person meetings. We have been doing a lot of things that we would normally do in person. We've been doing virtually. So for example, we did our economic development week. We did that virtually. So we brought in different businesses and things and did kind of panel discussions similar to this one that we're on right now, just to be able to continue to make sure that we're staying engaged with businesses and making sure we're still promoting the things and the contributions that they make to our community. We also did a lot of promotional stuff. So during Economic Development Week, we did a shop local promotion where we encouraged our residents to purchase virtually products from our businesses. And at the end of that, they submitted their receipts through email, and then we selected one person to win $1,000 that was donated from one of our larger, what I call corporate citizens. But that was just a way for us to still engage with businesses, engage the community, but do it in a virtual way and using technology to do that. But one of the things that we found out in that process was that a lot of our businesses aren't able to take sales or money electronically. And so we found out that a lot of our businesses that we wanted to do, that we wanted to help and infuse cash and do business with, they weren't able to receive the help that we were given because they weren't properly set up. And so one of the things that came out of that was our technology assistance grant. And what we did was businesses that didn't have the technology, whether it be a web presence or point of sale that they could do online, we provided a grant to get them up and running. So we built a website for them, paid for their first year of fees for any transaction, credit card transactions, and really helped them get up to running so that they could be able to take sales online, which really benefited a lot of our businesses.
What a great way to demonstrate success or to demonstrate commitment for your business's success by giving some grants out to help them get equipped for the tools that they need to have to just operate. That's very cool. I'm becoming more and more impressed with South Fulton all the time.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that.
Chris, monitoring feedback in law enforcement is always a critical aspect of the job. What are you doing in Mountain View to help measure feedback from your residents?
I'll give you a couple of different examples. One is a very high level. Every few months, we'll send out a survey across our different platforms. And being someone who hates doing surveys myself, we keep them very short. 3 questions, right? What do you like what we're doing? What do you not like what we're doing? And what do you want to hear more from us? So that helps us direct, we learn things, because for us, we didn't know that, the residents a while back wanted to hear more about crime stories and things happening in town. And we thought the opposite. We thought, people don't really want to hear what's going on crime-wise in their neighborhood. We don't want them to think there's more crime, et cetera. And so we shift, right? But there's also another great example is in the months following the George Floyd incident in Minneapolis, we obviously heard and we're doing a lot of dialoguing with our residents. And we actually created a virtual academy called MVPDX, loosely patterned after TEDx talks, where they're really short, quick hit discussion programs done over Zoom. And we took a cross section of a lot of the concerned residents and community, many of whom were critics of the police department, and formed a cohort. And we basically, it was a high touch environment where we went in and the first thing we said was, we're not here to preach at you. We're not here to tell you how we do anything. We're here to listen. And we're here to just answer any questions you have. And we covered a host of different topics. And a really interesting dynamic takes place in that mindset, because it goes from the national very quickly to the local dynamic and talking points. And some of the quotes we heard from kind of self-proclaimed activists that didn't quite like us very much, they said, we really wanted to hate you coming into this, but we really can't right now. We didn't quite understand what you did, how you got funded, how, this even came down to how city budgets work versus county budgets, because, there's a lot of cry for mental health training, everything. Well, we know working in government that much of that is covered on a county level, and you can't defund a city department to influence something on the county side. It's a lot of those types of discussions. So that approach has worked quite well for us in the law enforcement sector.
Just out of curiosity, how has the attendance been in your MPD-VX? That's very cool.
We purposely tried to keep it small. This first cohort was 10. And what happens is when they graduate, so to speak, they stay with us and they help form the second cohort, which we're about to start in a few months, which then help, so over time we will build this alumni that not only serves as kind of community stakeholders, but people who have interacted very closely with us and can kind of speak on our behalf if need be.
And are you doing it simply or focused mostly on law enforcement activities, or is it citywide issues?
This one is just law enforcement, and especially on these topics that are right front and center for the nation right now: racial equity and justice, mental health response, things like that.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's very creative and innovative way of engaging your residents. Brian, what are you guys doing down in Baytown to measure resident feedback?
So one thing that we actually recently implemented within the last, it was in the works prior to COVID, but was actually pushed out during COVID, is what we call Baytown Engage. And so we're currently utilizing the Bang the Table platform to allow our residents to really engage in a variety of topics in a more meaningful way, in addition, to social media that has this place, but to really put a name and face to the staff that are involved in a particular project. What also this platform has allowed us to do is to have transition to have allowing virtual, public hearings. Specifically, we have $30 million road expansion project on our primary commercial corridor off of I-10, and to understand the concerns that our residents and business owners, and to also allow them to see how that project's going to be phased from conception to design to construction, and then the final closeout. Is really a great tool for us. We've also started to use QR codes, which are important for some of our parks and recreation events. We have a wonderful nature center. So to be able to relay information via the QR codes, to be able to place those not only digitally and online, but also to partner with some of our local businesses. We also, like I mentioned earlier, we have our community scorecard that we partner with ClearPoint. And one thing that we're looking forward to implementing and partnering with some of our sister communities in Harris County is putting together a consortium of called the Gulf Coast benchmarking initiatives to measure and analyze some of the best practices of communities in our area are moving forward with, and how can we either implement those here or understand, what are some of the differences and challenges as to why we might not be making those certain standards, or some of the ways. And I believe our public affairs uses Meltwater to measure engagement, with our citizens. And we have two simultaneous projects. So we're going through complete website overhaul, making sure that that's ADA compliant. And so I think that was through Civic Plus, and then also utilizing Tyler Technologies to improve our permitting process, to make sure that's 100% digital for our developers, the businesses, as well as our citizens who want to put in a new driveway.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. Baytown is really using a lot of different technology platforms. I mean, all of you have talked about the use of technology for getting that real-time virtual kind of response and that input. The online permitting, of course, is such a great thing. I have particularly picked up on what most communities are going to be needing to do, and that is to kind of think of solutions that are collaborative and beyond your municipal boundaries. Is there any organized way that you are garnering input regionally, Brian, to get the values from the region on any particular areas of service level change?
So what we have in Texas, it's called an ETJ. And so it extends outside our city limits. And so we already have those residents involved in our planning and zoning. So when new development, whether it's commercial or residential, are interested in locating in our area, they're already involved in that conversation, as well as our relationships with Harris County as well as what we really rely on when it comes to building those relationships and partnerships on a more regional basis. And then the Gulf Coast benchmarking initiative, with our other communities in Harris County, trying to make sure that we're regionally focused on implementing the changes and wants and desires of our citizens.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, best of luck on going through that process. That's a very important approach and an important thing for communities to be thinking about doing. So, thanks. Well, this has been great. Why don't we take a moment to see if there's any questions from the audience? Are there any questions that you guys would like to ask amongst yourselves? Here's a question I would ask to all of you. What has been the biggest challenge for your organization during this COVID period? Any of you can jump in on that.
Well, I'll chime in. I think for me personally, being an economic development professional, we're people. We love people person. So we engage with people all the time. That's 90% of what I do is build relationships. And I think just being able to have that connectivity with folks and just being around people, I think has really been impactful. Every now and then, we'll have something at work where we kind of have to come together, some people in small groups, and people you haven't seen in months. And so, like I said, we've been still closed since March. So I mean, we've been closed for a long time. So I would say that's really one of the biggest challenge for someone who like me personally.
Yep. Chris, Brian, anything to add to that?
I think what our realization was, you forget how much city work gets done just at the water cooler, right? Those kind of organic passing through the hallways, something that would take 8 seconds to deal with or solve, now has to be a half-hour scheduled Zoom meeting, and it's highly inefficient in that sense. And then, of course, like everyone else, you miss just the bonds and the camaraderie. In the police department, we have everyone siloed off. You know, we don't allow officers to go into dispatch. Our command staff follows kind of a designated survivor rule where we're not really physically in each other's space, even though we might be in the building, just to keep quarantine safety rules and stuff like that. So months and months into this, it does get fatiguing from that standpoint.
Right. You think about the external changes or the impacts on your community, but a lot of residents probably don't understand or appreciate all of the internal aspects of what it takes to keep their services being delivered in a way that they expect them to be delivered. Right. Anything, Brian, you want to add?
Interestingly enough, one thing that we did realize from our leadership team, speaking, about engagement, is we did lose a level of collaboration when we do have Zoom meetings, in particular. That focus, and maybe having some of our directors not having their screens on, so really interacting, and being a participant in the conversation. So there was a little bit of loss in engagement over the last several months, and you can kind of see where people have a little bit partitioned off and not thinking holistically about the entire organization. So that is one thing that I have noticed.
As you kind of think about where we're at in this whole engagement time, and you start thinking about what's going to be hitting your communities in the future, any kind of emerging issues, do any of you have anything to share for other communities about what you're seeing those emerging things to be, in the context of engagement and maintaining that sense of community?
What comes to mind for me is there's been a lot of talk of the positive and negative effects of social media, right? And so you have a country and a community that are increasingly divided and unable to dialogue. And so I think, at least for us in the police department, we see our role as staying apolitical and somehow navigating these discussions without alienating either side, if you will, but also to be the leader in that space, to initiate and create the space and environment for these kind of difficult conversations to take place. It's not ideal, especially in a virtual Zoom setting, and looking forward to the day that we can get different voices in a room together, because body language and nonverbal communication accounts for a lot, and you just don't have that in a virtual environment like this.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else on that topic?
Yeah, I think from our standpoint, and we've been hearing a lot about dialogue around this. Just, for example, like in South Fulton, we opened up a co-working space in February. And so then in March, we closed that facility down. And so just thinking about what are going to be the impacts as you move forward into the future of what does workspace look like? There's some reports that it will be forever different. And you see a lot of folks, and we joke about this in our city, that we've been more effective when we're at home because we don't have, as Chris said earlier, all the water cooler talk, because everybody's actually at their home working by themselves. And so we've been much more efficient while we've been at home than sometimes we are when we get called into those impromptu meetings at City Hall. And so just really understanding what that's going to look like moving forward, I think is really something, especially when you think about, trying to bring developers build Class A office space. That's going to impact us in the future as we look at more and more people working from home, because the reality is, and I say this in a joking way, but I really mean it, the city's been using my electricity and my Wi-Fi for the last several months, and that saved obviously the city money. And so it's going to be the same effect with corporations. Well, it's just cheaper for us to allow this employee to work from home because we don't have to cool a building, we don't have to heat a building, we don't have to pay for electricity. And so I think that's going to have an impact as we look into the future.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with work practices once the world starts loosening up a little bit. Brian, how about you? Anything jump to mind for you?
I mean, ultimately, I think the financial and economic impacts. I know every community is different. Specifically thinking about here in Southeast Texas, the oil and gas industry, and even prior to COVID, there was already a decline in that. Jobs, bringing people into the workforce. How does that impact developers and housing? So fortunately, here in Baytown, we have not significantly been impacted from COVID, but I do know a lot of other communities that are, whether it's sales tax driven, are struggling. Some of our communities here in Southeast Texas are hurting extremely bad at this time. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Thank you. Well, this has been just great, all of you, with what you've shared. It really has just got my mind spinning in terms of the challenges that are in front, but the kind of creative ways that you're dealing with it. I think that as you kind of look at these 3 points, all of you are connecting with your residents in a variety of different ways, but all of your communities have placed a high priority and value on all of them. You all appreciate the value of meeting personally, yet recognize that you got to be creative in dealing with things virtually, at least for the time being, and maybe even for the longer term. But you've talked about the real-time aspect of having that interaction, and that's a really important thing. I think all of you really resonated around the notion that resident engagement really does have an impact on the sense of community. Christopher, the newness of your community puts you in such a unique spot to be able to really drive home on the values that residents have in kind of creating their brand new environment. And they just have these challenges laid on top of them. I think of Chris's comments on just the challenges that police officers are currently in and how you go about to creatively engage with residents so that they appreciate the hard work that you're doing. I think that virtual academy thing is just super. And that's a model that I think a lot of communities should be sharing. And Brian, the things that you were addressing about the strategic approach of using resources and engaging with your residents around those resources, that just is a really meaningful way. And I know that from my work, it really does. That is what residents are looking for. They want to be informed. They want to have trust and faith in their local governments. We certainly have found that that is the case, that actually during COVID, the support for local government has actually increased just because of the way that the engagement is happening. Technology is certainly driving the virtual aspect of our world. And I was really happy to hear about a lot of the tools, both homegrown as well as commercial tools that are being used for helping you to engage, just so that you can work in this virtual kind of a scene in helping to keep your communities together. So let me just thank all of you for your perspectives. This was a really worthwhile hour for me, and I'm sure for others. So what we're going to be doing is from here on out, I'm going to be following up with emails so that you can just simply get to know each other a little bit and you get a little bit of the background from each other. We've been doing these panels, and we're going to have another one actually next week. Next week, we've got the communities of Charlottesville, Virginia, Asheville, North Carolina, and San Dimas, California participating. And so that's going to be an exciting conversation as well, I'm sure, on the same topic around maintaining a sense of community in the socially distanced world. We've recorded the session, and so when we get this all processed, I will send this out to all of you so that you have the opportunity to review it and to share it with all of your connections on LinkedIn or any other social media outlets or any way that you'd like to. And then I certainly would welcome any feedback that you have or suggestions for improving this kind of a forum for getting people's input on this important topic. So let me just thank you all again for joining me today and for spending the time on talking about what is a very important topic. So thank you very much.